Uh, Announce it first and then.
Recording. JB, welcome to today's event. We're very excited to have everyone here and Dr. Vivek Kumar. And it seems like we have folks from the US and from India at least, and maybe other places too. So my name is Vineet. I'm a second-year PhD student at Northwestern University here in the US. Also upper caste Banya background and grew up in the diaspora. I'm here as a member of the Ambedkar Du Bois Society at Northwestern University. So I'm going to open with a few words just to introduce the Ambedkar Du Bois Society, the ADBS, and a little bit about why we're here today. And then I'll hand over to Monica to introduce Dr. Kumar, and we'll get started. So our group, the Ambedkar Du Bois Society, is a group of Ambedkarite students at Northwestern University in Chicago, USA, advocating for global anti-caste and anti-racist movements. We launched as an organization last year on 17 November 2022, when we demanded Northwestern join other universities in the US to recognize caste discrimination as a reality and to add caste as a protected category. This has not yet been done. The name of our group brings together Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. So Dr. Ambedkar is one of the most important social scientists of the 20th century, one of the most important Dalit activists in the fight against casteism, and he also wrote the Indian Constitution. For, I think many of you are aware, but for any of you who are unfamiliar, the greeting that I opened with, Jai Bhim, is in honor of Dr. Ambedkar. And the Bhim refers to his first name, Vemula. So for those unfamiliar with the greeting, I invite you just to keep yourselves muted, but to say it out loud, Jai Bhim. Dr. Du Bois was equally important in the Black liberation movements and the Pan-African movements. And as a matter of fact, he founded the first school of sociology in the United States. And so he really is a leader in the discipline. And so both scholars were aligned in their activism. They saw the global nature of their enjoined struggles. They saw scholarship and activism as intertwined efforts, and they even shared a brief correspondence. Despite their importance, both were marginalized by dominant upper caste and white academics in their respective nations. And it's only been in the last couple of decades due to the work of many, many scholars to elevate their names and to actually see them in dominant spaces coming up. While they were not alone in their fights, we invoke their names to reify that there is a shared solidarity for a global struggle for global anti-caste, anti-racist movements. And we see them as role models for the many of us who are in academia who seek to use our scholarship to build vocabularies of justice. We're holding this event today on January 30th to commemorate Rohith Vemula. Today marks what would have been the 35th birth anniversary of Rohith Vemula, a prominent Ambedkarite activist and Dalit PhD student. He was also studying sociology like some of us here. In 2016, at age 26, Rohith Vemula was institutionally murdered after years of harassment and discrimination by university administration and Hindu supremacists. So for those who have not seen it, his final letter is beautiful and powerful. He has this phrase, "My birth is my fatal accident." And I think, for me at least, it seems to capture what I see as the love that fuels this resistance as much as the resistance itself. So that's for the opening, and the rest of the event will be as follows. I'll turn it over to Monica to introduce the speaker, Dr. Kumar. He'll speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A for the remaining time. So, and as I mentioned, we're recording the event, so feel free to turn off microphone, video if you'd like, leave them on if you'd like, and we will be posting this to YouTube later. So with that, I'll turn it over to Monica.
Thank you, Vineet. Jai Bhim, everyone. So to introduce Professor Dr. Vivek Kumar, Dr. Vivek Kumar is a professor of sociology, a world-ranking scientist, and public intellectual. He's the former chairperson of Center for the Study of Social Systems, School of Social Sciences, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he earned his PhD. He's Ambedkar Chair Professor in Sociology, instituted by Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Government of India. He has also been coordinator of Global Studies program at JNU, run in collaboration of Freiburg and Humboldt University in Germany, Glasgow, Cape Town University, University of Pretoria, South Africa, and Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. As a Fulbright Teachers Fellow, he has been visiting associate professor in the Department of Sociology at Columbia University in the US, where he taught a course, Social Exclusion and Inclusion in Indian Society. As a DAD UGC Fellow, he has also been a visiting faculty at the Humboldt University in Germany. Currently, he's the editor of Indian Sociological Society's Hindi journal, Bharatiya Samaj Shastra Samiksha, published by Sage India. His publications include Caste and Democracy in India, India's Roaring Revolution, and Dalit Leadership in India, Decoding Ambedkar, Ideas of Nation and Nation Building. His seminal articles include How Egalitarian is Indian Sociology, Towards Epistemology of Social Exclusion, कमजोर वर्गों का समाज शास्त्र, प्रजातंत्र में जाति, आरक्षण और दलित, बहुजन समाज पार्टी एवं संरक्षक परिवर्तन and Dalit Agenda 2050 are his books in Hindi. He completed a research project with Professor Jim Sarino of Harvard University in the US and University of British Columbia, Canada. Till now, he has supervised approximately 100 MPhil and PhD students. As a scholar, he has over 700 citations at Google Scholar and a ResearchGate. Approximately 70,000 academicians have either read or visited his work. Thank you for being here with us today and to talk to us about an epistemology of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and philosophy and thought. I, for one, am looking very forward to this talk, so I'll just hand it over to Dr. Vivek Kumar now.
सब म्यूट है आपका.
Thank you, Monica, for this elaborate introduction. And I think I'm audible now. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, and also thanks the Ambedkar Du Bois organization for giving me this opportunity to be with you. And of course, today is a very emotional moment for us also, remembering Rohith for his sacrifice which he made. But as you have just talked about that, how to remember Du Bois and Ambedkar on this day is also something which many of us, and I like the way that Vineet, when he spoke that Ambedkar as a social scientist or academician, because usually we are very happy to reduce him only to an activist. So thank you for that. I think that is the insight we want to bring in. So the title of the talk which I have given you is Towards Epistemology of Baba Saheb's Thought and Philosophy. And why should we be doing this? I think I begin with this, that there are four very important reasons because of which I have titled this. One, as soon as we really talk about epistemology, well, we would like to define what exactly epistemology is. So I draw it from Ted Benton, and Ted Benton talks about that epistemology is an approach to understanding which tells us that what can be known with certainty and what can be left to faith and opinion. That is one of the very important aspects which epistemology tells. Then second aspect of epistemology is what is the source and foundation of your knowledge. And third thing epistemology tells us is that how to differentiate between scientific knowledge from non-scientific knowledge. So if we club these three characteristics towards any understanding, it will give us the epistemology. And that is why I'm trying to look at Baba Saheb Ambedkar's writing and speeches for us. So what we can know with certainty that Baba Saheb was involved in production of knowledge. It is not actually, I'm not dealing with Baba Saheb's only speeches, because in India, many of the leaders who spoke, and that became knowledge. Their speeches became knowledge. But I'm not talking about Baba Saheb speeches only. I am talking about, or I will deal with Baba Saheb's writing, which were done on formal occasions. Either he was presenting as a seminar paper, or he was giving a memorial talk, or he was presenting something in parliament or in some committees and commissions, which was referential knowledge and also based on hard facts. That is where actually we begin with the epistemic basis of Baba Saheb's knowledge. So what we will get if we really approach Baba Saheb Ambedkar with epistemic basis, what we will get? One of the very important things which we get is that we will like to deconstruct the existing understanding of Baba Saheb Ambedkar till now. Why? Baba Saheb Ambedkar has been only looked at that he has engaged academically only with caste. Nothing else is there. And therefore, I feel that there's a process of reductionism which is involved in Baba Saheb's evaluation. And this reductionism only looks at him as he has talked about genesis of caste or annihilation of caste. And second, he at the most is a activist who has led Dalit movement. But friends, if we really talk about epistemic basis of his knowledge, I think there will be much broader framework to understand his production of knowledge. The second, I think, very important aspect which epistemology will give us is that what are the concepts, perspectives, theories, definitions Baba Saheb has used to produce his knowledge. He doesn't actually deal without the description, definitions, perspectives, and also references to produce his knowledge. So we will look at when we engage with him. The third aspect is the logical sequencing. In the production of knowledge, what is the sequence with which Baba Saheb Ambedkar produces his knowledge? For example, we look at that whenever we talk about that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has talked about caste and annihilation of caste. That is the sequence which is given to us. But friends, when we go in the epistemology of Baba Saheb's production of knowledge about caste, then I think there are 7 aspects of social order in which Baba Saheb lays this framework. To begin with, Baba Saheb has tried to talk about Hindu social order because he doesn't talk about the framework of caste. He is not talking caste as an independent entity or as an independent unit. Most of the authors, thinkers, they have tried to talk about caste as an independent unit. And that's where Baba Saheb says that they have committed a folly. They have committed a mistake that they have tried to evolve caste or understand caste as an independent unit. It is not. It is part of a larger whole, and that is Hindu social order. And then he tries to look at the individual's place in Hindu social order, whether Hindu social order is an open social order or it is a closed social order. The third aspect, Baba Saheb says that nature and the structure of the Hindu social order. I will give you, if the time permits, I will give you that how unique he is when he is trying to understand the social structure, because he is not taking only fourfold Varna hierarchy given in Rig Veda, Purusukta, 10th Mandal, 90th Richa. No, he has a very elaborate version of Hindu social order. And fourth aspect, he gives us the origin of Varnas and of course, origin of Shudras. Fifth, the origin and development of caste and caste system. And then he comes to sixth, untouchables and untouchability. And then he wants to go to annihilation of caste. Such is the elaborate engagement which Baba Saheb has when he tries to understand caste. But the problem is that he has been reduced only to genesis of caste and annihilation of caste. And people really flaunt, they have read Ambedkar. When they say that, yeah, I've read Ambedkar. When I ask, what have you read? Oh, I have read Annihilation of Caste. As if that is the only intellectual and academic exercise which Baba Sahib has done. And therefore, friends, it is very important to go to the epistemology of Baba Sahib Ambedkar's thought and philosophy. So, giving you this example to prove the point that no, we can really deconstruct the existing structure with which Baba Sahib Ambedkar has really understood. So I come to the really the epistemic basis. One, that epistemic basis I draw from especially C. Wright Mills. And C. Wright Mill talks about that for any sociological imagination, there are three coordinates. One is biography, another is history, and their interaction in society. Biography, history, and society are three coordinates for any sociological imagination. We can add number of other aspects as well, but I'm really fond of actually quoting Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And Thomas Kuhn argues in his book that researchers are not only made by data collection, rather they are also made by changing the paradigm. And that is where I think if we look at Baba Sahib Ambedkar's production of knowledge, the paradigm changes. And therefore, I think it is very important to begin with this epistemological basis. Now, in this context, I look at the influences on Baba Sahib Ambedkar, that Baba Sahib's biography breeds at least three very important influences. I'm not going into detail, but one of the very important influence comes from Kabir. And people played out and they have started looking more on John Dewey rather than influence of Kabir. The second is the Buddha, and third is Jyotiba Phule. I think three very important personalities which have influenced Baba Sahib Ambedkar's thought and philosophy from the very childhood. So we have to really take into consideration what were the influences. If the time permits, I will definitely like to elaborate. But after that, there are 9 types of experiences. If we take hermeneutics, then the day-to-day meaning of the people, the day-to-day meaning of the events which influence Ambedkar's or which has influenced Ambedkar's thought and philosophy are very important. I will just like to flag off these 9 types of experiences. There may be many other, but I think from 1891, when he was born, and 1956, when he attained parinirvana, I think within 65 years, we can divide at least 9 to 10 interrelated and interconnected epochs of his life, which have shaped his thought. And experiences are very important in the shaping. And that's why I am bringing Sri Wright Mills, Thomas Kuhn, and also we can bring 2 more people. One is Bourdieu, who talk about the cultural capital and how the cultural capital has influenced the consciousness or construction of consciousness of the individual, out of which production of knowledge takes place. And last but not the least, I think Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire talks about pedagogy of the oppressed. Pedagogy of the oppressed will be written by the oppressed. Oppressor will not write the pedagogy for the emancipation of the oppressed. And it is the oppressor which has to emancipate the oppressor and oppressed both. And therefore, I think Ambedkar's experiences will really look at the production of knowledge, which has really given us a emancipatory agenda. Now, to begin with, his childhood experiences of exclusion, and that is written. Baba Sahib, waiting for visa, has recorded what and what are the type of experiences of exclusion he faced. I'm not going into the details. I think this biographical sketch is important. Therefore, we should record that how in childhood Baba Sahib Ambedkar faced exclusion. But in his youth, he has a very different type of experience, especially in Columbia and later on in London Institute of Economics from 1913 to 1921. We can look at that the freedom and the equality of the experience which he faced. And Baba Sahib writes that I had forgotten every type of exclusion which I suffered in the childhood. So that means equality, liberty, and fraternity played a very dominant role in the construction of consciousness and production of knowledge when he was youth and studying in the university system. The third experience comes when he goes back to Maharaja of Baroda's, administration, and again faces a very different type of exclusion. And there he tries to decide. That how we can really look at that even an educated person, a foreign educated person, is not given equality. And therefore he takes a resolve, and that resolve becomes the big point, that how he is going to annihilate this exclusion. The fourth experience comes when he becomes the part of the Viceroy's Council, and in the Viceroy's Council he tries to produce number of legislation. One of the very important legislation which he brings is the maternity leave for the women folk. And there was not only this humanitarian reason because of which the women should get maternity, there was a philosophical reason which Baba Sahib registered, and that was that because the women are going to give us the future generation of our society, therefore they should be given this maternity leave as well. So, education, the right to education, all that comes during this Viceroy's Council period. Then the fifth experience is very important to be noted here, when he joins the Constituent Assembly as a common member. Now, as a common member, his contribution is to keep our eye not only on Jawaharlal Nehru, when he criticizes the memorandum which was kept for a starting point of our constitution, and he tries to underline what are the fault line which have been put by in the memorandum by Jawaharlal Nehru. And then he criticizes the fight between Muslim League and also Congress. And he tries to argue that we have to give benefit of doubt to the Muslim League, because our problem is not the problem of sitting together, but our problem is to start a life. And if we start a life, then I think we will be able to take a decision. So there was a very, very important barometer for him to judge the contribution made by different forces in the Constituent Assembly as a common man. And then, of course, the sixth experience, when he becomes the member of the drafting committee and as its chairman. Now, there also his contribution has belittled. People like Arun Shourie have written a book-length volume, Worshipping the False God, and he has been only called as a draftsman rather than a constitution maker. Now, there is an empirical data to prove what he did, because we know that how many days he worked in the making of the Indian Constitution, 2 years, 11 months, and 28 days, and then 141 days as the chairman of the drafting committee. And After that, when he produced the memorandum or the draft constitution, there were 7,635 amendments which were placed by the people. 7,635 amendments. Baba Sahib read 7,635 amendments, discarded 5,162 amendments, and incorporated 2,473 amendments. Now, friends, it is up to you to decide. A person who has read 7,635, discarded 5,162, incorporated 2,743, whether he can be called as a constitution maker or not. It is up to you to decide how much Herculean task he has done, but people are not ready to accept. Therefore, I think this experience have to be analyzed, engaged, and then we can look at that what's contribution of Baba Sahib Ambedkar is. The seventh actually contribution comes, or seventh experience comes when he becomes the first law minister of the free India. And he tries to actually bring in a very important legislation for the rights of the women, and that is Hindu Code Bill. And then he resigns from Nehru's cabinet. I think his resignation speech of 1951 should be engaged to understand the problems or the pain and agony which he suffered as a part of the Nehru cabinet. In that context, I think the production of knowledge when takes later on, when Baba Sahib starts talking about Hindu Code Bill and he talks about the rights for the woman, then I think this experiences come to fore. The eighth experience comes when Baba Sahib Ambedkar becomes an opposition leader in the parliament and the way he is raising. I think three very important points which Baba Sahib Ambedkar raised in his resignation. One, that Hindu Code Bill was not passed because actually Nehru did not put that much of effort to give the rights to the women. And later on, gradually, one by one, whether it was the Hindu Marriage Act, whether it is Dowry Act, whether it is right to property, whether it is, right to adoption, where consent of the woman have to be taken into consideration, all these rights gradually passed. But at that time, it was not passed. Therefore, Baba Sahib resigned. The second reason because of resignation was that the commission for the backward classes was supposed to be in place, but there was no one taking. Under Article 340 of the Indian Constitution, there was supposed to be a commission which will identify caste other than the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, but nothing was happening. And therefore, Baba Sahib in volume 14, page 1319 writes that why he is resigning, and one of the reason is this, that nothing was taking place for other backward classes. And third reason was, of course, that a raw deal was given to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Therefore, I think the experience of Baba Sahib Ambedkar as a cabinet minister becomes very germane to his thought and philosophy. The opposition, when he becomes opposition leader, all these experiences from the very beginning starts coming to the fore. And therefore, friend, his activism changes. The ninth experience when he becomes and starts floating different political parties. And here also, when he starts leading the movement, I think his movement has to be categorized in at least 6 parts. One, there is socio-religious reform movement, no doubt about that. But there is a political movement, very different political party. Then there is, of course, a statesman-like movement when he becomes the part of the constitution making. The constitutionalist comes to the fore. And as a educationist. He start establishing number of organization and produces at least through his life 5 types of newspapers, starting from Mook Nayak to Prabuddha Bharat. Just see the dynamics which he is trying to produce. That means he has a hope, starting also from Independent Labour Party to Republic Party of India. There is a dynamics altogether where he incorporates bigger and bigger agenda for the development. The last part of his movement is he becomes a religious leader, where he joins again to Buddhism. So I think, these experiences are part and parcel of his understanding, construction and consciousness, and out of which production of knowledge is taking place. Now, in this context, friends, therefore, we come to the other part of his epistemology, and that is the perspective with which he has produced knowledge. Because Baba Saheb did not produce knowledge in a linear manner, as that actually that there is some event which is taking place and I will write about that event, or I will speak about that event. That is not the way he has produced knowledge. Rather, he has engaged with a particular type of perspective and with which he starts producing his knowledge. The first perspective is historical perspective. Baba Saheb Ambedkar has used historical perspective in his understanding. And I quote one of the verses from volume 3, page 151, 1987 edition. What Baba Saheb says? Baba Saheb says, much of ancient history, much of the ancient history of India is no history at all. Not that ancient India has no history. It has plenty of it, but it has lost its character. It has been made mythology to amuse women and children. This seems to have been done deliberately. And therefore, I think Baba Saheb had a mission that he will start producing a very, very dovetailed and a very objective, and I think at that time Newtonian physics model might have dominated. He was finding positivistic understanding of the events. Now, in that context, I think the first perspective is historical. How much time I have, Vinit?
You have time, I think at least 15 minutes or something.
15 minutes,
So-
yeah. Because, professors are trained to speak for 1 hour, and that goes actually. So I just want, so this perspective, historical perspective, if we go into the history that Baba Saheb Ambedkar is actually trying to produce, I will give you example for that. But let me come to the second perspective, and that is basically related. There is evolutionary perspective also involved in the production of this knowledge. And if we try to define evolutionism, that means evolutionism is a process in which knowledge actually moves from simple to complex and doubly complex. So if we look at, Baba Saheb begins defining very, very simplistically. For example, I give you that when he was trying to look at politics, he defines what is politics. And then he goes on to define who is a politician. And not only who is a politician, then he goes on to trace the understanding from Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. He uses Abraham Lincoln's definition. So, he begins with simple and goes into complex. Third aspect, when you look at this, this complexity, he tries to conceptualize parliamentary democracy. And within parliamentary democracy, he tries to look at Western democracy. Now, in Western democracy, it's not very simplistically understanding, rather a critique. He evolves a critique of Western democracy, and especially when he is looking that why did Western democracy failed in Italy, in Germany, in Spain, in England, in Russia. And then he comes back to the idea of nation and nation building. And using Ernest Renan, he uses Ernest Renan's definition of defining what is a nation, and then looks at that how the process of nation building will begin. And from there, he gives actually a very different perspective to the ideal society. So what is the ideal society? What are the characteristics of the ideal society? And if ideal society is based on equality, liberty, and fraternity, from where he is drawing, and he is very categorical to say that, no, I am not drawing it from the French Revolution. I have taken it from my master, the Buddha. Now, the problem is that why he says, or why actually he says that there's a difference between French Revolution cardinal principle of equality, liberty, and fraternity, and Buddhist equality, liberty, and fraternity. He says that one is political, another is social. And in social, especially Buddhist equality and fraternity, the fraternity is given a higher pedestal, a higher position. Why? Because you can make a law for equality, you can make a law for liberty, but you cannot make a law for fraternity. And therefore, he gives, a very different order. Now, therefore, friends, what I'm trying to argue that he has a evolutionary perspective which starts from very simple and becomes very complicated or complex. This is the second perspective. The third perspective is Indo-logical perspective. Babasaheb Ambedkar's understanding of many of the events or many of the institutions is based on Indo-logical perspective. One example which I want to give is the status of women, especially the lower strata women. Why and how and since when the lower strata women status started deteriorating. And for this, he goes not only in the Genesis, caste genesis and mechanism, where he's talking about surplus men and surplus women. That is not all. Where the institution of sati, the institution of child marriage, and widowhood maintenance, these institutions were born, no doubt, because of the surplus men and surplus women theory. But specifically, he talks about madness of Manu. And in that, he criticizes Varna Shankara theory, because Varna Shankar theory says that castes were born because of the lower strata men and higher strata women. When they met, then actually their offsprings, they became untouchables. Now, Ambedkar refutes this argument that this is not tenable at all, because you are casting aspersion on the character of the women. Now, this is not at all tenable. And then he comes to say that how did the open social order, where the lower strata, the Anuloma marriage was allowed, where the marriage of the lower strata woman and upper strata male was allowed, and the offspring used to trace the lineage from the father. But it was Manu who stopped this. And since then, what happened? The lineage was supposed to be traced from mother. So from Pitra Savaranya, father's lineage, to Matra Savaranya, that was the legacy. And because of that, deterioration of the status of women started. Now, there are many other references from Rig Veda, not only Rig Veda, but Baba Sahib Ambedkar's use of Atharveda for the status of the Shudras. I think Atharveda becomes very important. The status of the women in the ancient India, whether it is Panini's Ashtadhyayi or whether it is Patanjali, I think all there's references. And one of the very important references he brings in from mythology, or you can say the Indology, is a fight between Janaka and Sulabha. Janak and Sulabha. Sulabha is a woman, and she is arguing to Janak that you have to contest with me. Now Janak says, no, I don't contest with women. Now this woman says, Sulabha says that, oh, we belong to a civilization where genders have no soul, and therefore souls have no gender. Souls have no gender, and therefore you have to contest with me. And she defeats. Therefore, friends, I think Baba Sahib Ambedkar has enough references from the Indological sources, and archaeological sources, I think, are also different. I'll come to that later. But right now I'm talking about the perspective. The perspective is basically Indological. The last perspective is comparative. Baba Sahib Ambedkar produced his knowledge in comparative perspective. One, that he tries to compare. He started actually comparing the religious aspects, then also compares the Japanese Revolution with French Revolution and Indian Revolution. He compares even slavery with untouchability. So this and then constitutions. There are comparative pictures of the constitutions, starting from American Constitution to South African, Australian, Canadian, and last but not least, the Indian Constitution. So a comparative perspective comes to his fore. This is the perspective. Last part of the epistemology, that how many, when I'm talking about epistemology, here I'm talking about the source and foundation of his knowledge. So 9 types of sources are available in Baba Sahib's production of knowledge. To begin with, the first source is archaeological source. Baba Sahib Ambedkar takes archaeological source to make his point. The second is archival source. He goes to the archives and he tries to look at actually the production of data from archives. The third is 6 types of encyclopedia. Baba Sahib Ambedkar has used 6 types of encyclopedia in the production of knowledge. The fourth is, of course, the paper clippings. Baba Sahib Ambedkar has used at that time the paper clippings for, if you look at volume 1, there is a entry on Chakwara. And Chakwara and Jhajjar case was very recently, how Baba Sahib Ambedkar used that paper clipping of 1936 of Times of India to make the sense that what is the practice of untouchability going on. The fifth is, of course, the committee reports. The sixth is the commission reports. Seventh, of course, is Baba Sahib's census data. How he collected at that time, I really don't know. But of course, he had collected data on census as well. 1871 onwards, there has been data in his writing. The eighth, of course, is the observation. Baba Sahib observed the reality on his own, not only from inside, but from outside. And last but not the least, the interaction. He interacted with his supporters, friends, and of course, his other people. He had views with them, and then he produced his knowledge. So I think there is a full collage of the knowledge, basis of knowledge, and characteristics of knowledge, which differentiates opinion and otherworldly knowledge to this worldly knowledge. And therefore, this becomes very objective production of knowledge. Friends, therefore, I think there is a need that we should engage with Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And if we engage with Baba Sahib Ambedkar's production of knowledge, referential knowledge, the type of people which he has engaged, I am forced to quote from Perry Anderson. Perry Anderson's book, Three Ideologies. I think then, of course, Cosimo Zene's comparison between Baba Sahib Ambedkar and Gramsci, Cosimo Zene, Ambedkar and Gramsci. And then, of course, Christopher Zeffelet's Untouchability. I think all these people have brought out the referential. When I was quoting this, that Baba Sahib Ambedkar used Gabriel Tarde. And Gabriel Tarde, sociologists would know that in 1921, one of the leading sociologists of France was Gabriel Tarde, who gave his, of course, law of imitation. When Latour used in 1950, people were saying that, oh, Latour has used Gabriel Tarde in 1950. But Baba Sahib used in 1921. So what the point I'm trying to make is that there is, of course, a very, very emphatic basis, epistemic basis, ontological basis of production of knowledge, which as a social scientist, as sociologists, we have missed the point. We have only looked at the activism of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And if we have done it, that is the process of reductionism. I think we have to deconstruct the erasure and reductionism, and we have to really decode Baba Sahib Ambedkar in its full-blown production of knowledge. I think I should stop here. If there are questions, then definitely I will take it.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Yes, if there are questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or, yeah, I think the Q&A would be better, but you can also unmute and ask a question or raise your hand with the feature. But thank you. I think you really established the social scientist of Dr. Ambedkar that is often lost in the discussion, and establishing the way he used the data in this kind of empirical, grounded way to advocate for his points, and also the theoretical junctures. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to open with? Okay, I can open with a question then. And please feel free to jump in. So one question I was trying to understand is when we talk about epistemology, to what extent is that an individual kind of project, and what extent is that a shared project, in the sense that Dr. Ambedkar is only understood as a theorist insofar as others recognize him as a theorist, insofar as others see this kind of work. So I think I was just interested in this when you were talking about epistemology, to what extent is it like, yeah, he is on his own in this process, or like how is the production of knowledge about Ambedkar also part of the epistemology, if that makes sense?
If I've understood you correctly, I think, I can take it from Perry Anderson. And Perry Anderson says that, because of his training, especially because of his training, I think very serious training, whether it was Columbia or whether it was in London School of Economics, I think his training forced him to produce a referential knowledge. And references can be only had when you have in-depth understanding of a phenomena, and also the type of literature which has been produced in that area. So I think, his training in the university system, and that to higher level of education, where he has done his PhD and DSc, I think that helped him to frame this epistemic basis. Otherwise, he would have also had, hearsay, or he would have only observable realities rather than referential and substantial way to produce or prove the point, actually, because is one fact doesn't remain only with one reference. There are multiple references to prove a point, and also from very different angle.
Thank you. I see a hand in the chat.
Hi, my name is Motika. I'm from Chicago. So, Professor Vivek ji, thank you for your lecture. My question, before I put it, let me just say something. I grew up in a kind of a posh area where we got very good teachers growing up, and caste was definitely denounced, and it was never a part of our lives. And nobody around me ever practiced caste system. However, so that is how we grew up, in an area where you would not look down upon a janitor, maybe a jhaduwala, and you would call them bhaiya and give them proper respect. That is how what we were taught. It was much later in my life. Uh, just so you know, I'm in my late 40s right now. It was much later in my life that I came to know that even today, there are places in India where a person of certain caste, when they enter a village, they have to take off their shoes, and they have to, they cannot take their cycles in that village. That is one India that I did not know existed. But now that we know, um, and I'm here in Chicago, I do listen from some people back home now that our social circle has increased, that there's a whole lot of this. Of course, anti-reservation sentiment is always there, and there is no way you can explain to them that there's a particular generation that uh, have from their previous generations suffered so much that to bring them at equal level, you need that reservation to help them get back on their feet. So there's a whole lot of argument there. uh, but sitting here, when you come across this kind of information that there are places where huge amount of casteist um, atrocities are still committed, what can we do? Because sitting on computer, typing, putting in papers is not helping, in my opinion. I might be wrong there. I don't know how that is helping the person who's facing atrocities. So, is there something we can do to mitigate, to put a dent in that kind of a system, that kind of action they have to face on daily basis?
Professor Kumar, yeah.
Well, our training is, as a sociologist, very different. We are trained only to talk about what it is, how it is, and why it is. We are not trained to talk about what it should be. But as a public intellectual, I can definitely argue, but not from my academic basis. One thing, actually, as Buddha would say, that let us think of our life. Our life, if we compare the life of the society, it is not even an iota of a second or a minute. So what we can do, just see the size of this world, which is so gigantic, so colossal, and look at us, what we are. We are such a small fry. So I think the best thing is that where we are, what we are, how we are, I think we will not commit that. If we start from there, I think we can make a beginning, or we can really make dent in the existing system. Because we don't care for ourselves. The problem is, actually. So I think we can begin with ourselves, with our home, and then our neighborhood, and then let's see actually from where, how far we can go. But these things, of course, I am not perturbed about the atrocity, because I think they are very, very, say, at a very basic level. There are much more heinous crimes which are committed and which are not visible. when the decisions are made for the institutions, when the decisions are made for certain benefits to be given, I think they are much more heinous. So a slap, a murder is not that pinching to me, but I think decisions do pinch. So if we are really interested, I think we also think that we are not going to take such a decision that will prove detrimental to the development of the Dalits. I think that is one of the decision which was taken against Rohith Vemula, and what happened. Not only one life, but I think thousands of life on the campuses are disturbed just because of one decision. If you scrap scholarship, if you don't scholarship on time, if you are not teaching them properly, if you're not ready to discuss their icons, iconography, or their movements, I think that is much more or a bigger crime that we commit.
Thank you.
Can I ask one follow-up question on this? So I think something I heard in the question was a distinction between the diaspora and India. And I know you've written about caste in the diaspora, and I was hoping you could say a few words just to discuss how it looks in the diaspora sometimes from your empirical work.
No, I think actually, caste in India is the part of the social structure. And how do I define social structure? I take it from S.F. Needle, who talks about that structure is basically permutation and combination of roles and statuses distributed in a society. So I think if we look at the roles and statuses distributed in society and justified by the sacred texts of Indian society, that becomes a structure in India where certain people are given certain roles to perform, and they have added stigma because of their roles. And this has happened from thousands of years. But in diaspora, caste is much not part of the social structure. It's a part of little bit of social, say, interaction. And that interaction especially, and one of the most important characteristics of caste which has gone in diaspora is the endogamy. I was reading one of the characteristics of BANA, Brahman Association of North America. If you look at one of the characteristics of BANA was that they want to facilitate their younger generation to search their spouses within their own caste. So even if they have traveled such a far, they are still looking their spouses from within their own caste. So caste remains in the process of endogamy, which leads in the process of interaction. And that is why there are so many organizations, whether it is BANA, TANA, or ANA, or whether there is actually temples, whether there are Ravidasi temples, I think they have formed their own caste and community groups. That creates the difference and division of interactional pattern. And that leads to the interests in the job market. I think that is the impact of caste in diaspora.
Thank you. There's some questions in the Q&A, so I'll read out a few of these. So one of them is, can you speak more about Babasaheb Ambedkar's role as a comparative scholar? You spoke about his work in studying constitutions and revolutions from around the world, as well as his comparisons between untouchability and slavery. Are there other national cultural traditions that he engaged with?
No, I think if you look at one of the very important aspect, that is religion. I think Babasaheb Ambedkar has tried to look at the religion, and that too from a very historical and evolutionary perspective. What does Babasaheb say? How religion has come into existence. That is the question which he begins with. And then he gives definition of religion. He also talks about emergence of God, then goes on to talk about that how every individual had a soul, and each individual is basically, he can become God. That is what actually he begins with. He differentiates between religion and Dhamma. Then he goes on to talk about different types of religion. At least he quotes Max Muller And Max Muller has talked about 10 types of religion, but he reduces them to 2 types of religion. One is bookless religion and another is revealed religion. Now from here, Baba Sahib moves on to look about the nature of religion. And then he tries to talk about the characteristics of religion. And he says that, look, there are at least 2 very different types of characteristics. One, religion has theology and another is ritual. People think ritual is religion and they forget about theology. So we have to talk about both these types of actually characteristics. But Baba Sahib Ambedkar is ready to look at different types of theology. And there also he talks about that there is mythical theology and there is civil theology. Now from where here Baba Sahib goes on to differentiate between Buddha and Karl Marx. And not only that, there has been 2 very different types of differences. One, he talks about the use of violence in Marxism, how use of violence takes place. But Buddhist revolution is always peaceful. Last but not the least, actually, dictatorship of proletariat is writ large in Marxism, but Buddha has denounced actually dictatorship. He talks about democratic revolution. So I think there is enough to be read as far as differences and comparison are concerned. I'm giving you this example, empirical example.
Thank you. I see there's a question in the chat from Nilkamal, and I see your hand up as well. So maybe you can just ask the question directly.
Neil Kamal.
So, yes, sir. So I'd like to ask that this lecture is behalf of Rohith Vemula birth anniversary. So what we as a academician do that we don't have this type of institutional murder in the present or any future of any students.
Now, I think first of all, we as young scholars or young teachers, we will first take a resolve that Eklavya will not give thumb anymore. What to say about life?
Yeah.
You know, that is one thing we all should take on this day of Rohith Vemula's actually sacrifice day. I think we should take a resolve that no more from now, whether it is any university or whether it is an IIT, we are not going to give our thumb. What to say about life? Then second, I think we should keep Baba Sahib Ambedkar's misery, tragedy, the pain, agony, suffering which Baba Sahib has suffered. Whether it was actually everywhere, every step, the way Baba Sahib has suffered. Or you can take Phule, how he has suffered. The way actually Sahuji has suffered. Periyar, I think all the Nancheli, you bring in actually Mata Savitribai Phule, I think all have suffered. Whether today's suffering is more than their suffering? If we really bring in the life and mission of those people in front of our eyes, I think I get lots of spirit. Whenever I look at myself down, I look at Baba Sahib Ambedkar's life. And I look at that the suffering is much, much more heinous, humongous. What are we actually? Are we being going let down in this modernity? No, not at all. I think that is the spirit with which we have to face the challenges.
Yeah, right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat from Tenzin. I'm very interested in learning more about the ideal society you mentioned in Ambedkar's influence from the Buddha. Was there a reason you said Buddha rather than Buddhism? And yeah, this is Tenzin's question.
No, of course, actually, I was talking about Buddhism, but you know that how Baba Sahib Ambedkar has answered this in volume 1 itself, that if somebody asks me, what should be the ideal of my society? What will be my society look like? I think it begins with that has to be equality, liberty, and fraternity. But I think it is much more beyond that. In volume 3, Baba Saheb Ambedkar is talking about that what is an open social order. I think that is more important that we have to look at. For an open social order, I think that that which gives freedom to the individual. An individual should be free agent. Now, in Indian society, the Hindu social order, individual is not a free agent. Individual is a part of a larger whole, and that large part of larger whole is Varna. Or sometimes, if he goes beyond that, he is also part of village, and that is why the horror killings are taking that villages. All the people born in the village, they are brothers and sisters, and therefore they cannot marry. So he is not a free agent. He's a part of a larger whole. And if somebody is suffering, an individual is suffering, he is not suffering because of his deeds, rather because of the Varna in which he is born. If somebody is enjoying the freedom and fruits of success, it is not he. Rather, he is basically enjoying the fruit of his Varna. And we can see that how people who are born in the upper strata, they draw charisma, and those who born actually at the lower strata, they are given stigma. And I think there is much to say about, if you can add P. Bourdieu's cultural capital, how the lower strata is bereft of cultural capital, and people have accumulation of cultural capital. Now, in this context, therefore, the social structure, according to Baba Saheb Ambedkar, is not suited for a very, very democratic society based on equality, liberty, and fraternity. And then he goes on to argue in volume 3 itself that, look, there is no equality, liberty, and fraternity. But how this order is sustained, I think that was very important. And 2 rights. Baba Saheb says that 2 rights, one, right to education and right to arm, they were taken away. Right to education was taken away, and therefore the lower strata did not question. The women could not question the structure. And right to arm was taken, therefore they could not revolt. And therefore, actually, this system was perpetuated. And connivance with the Kshatriyas and also the Rajas and the priest, actually, they were together. Therefore, I think this system has to be annihilated. And therefore, if you have equality, liberty, and fraternity, they are trinity of a system. They cannot be having individual equality. If there is no equality, there cannot be liberty and fraternity. They all have to be together, according to Baba Saheb Ambedkar. If you are having it together, then and then only I think the political democracy which has born will become social democracy. Otherwise, political democracy is there. One man, one vote, one vote, one man, one vote, and one vote is equal, fine for everyone. But in economic realm, in social realm, they are not equal. So how can actually this political democracy will be translated into social and economic democracy? I think that was Baba Saheb Ambedkar talking about that fraternity has to come. Otherwise, it will not be a real democracy.
Thank you. Lots of questions coming in. So there's one in the chat right now. Are there any works to read Baba Saheb from a psychoanalytic perspective? Not just read him, but what would Dr. Ambedkar have to say about this? So I understand you brought some of this in experience in epistemology, but if you have any more thoughts on this.
When I was trying to argue that actually that your location in the social structure is very important, because it is the location in the social structure has a bearing on the construction of consciousness. The location of the social structure gives you either accumulation of cultural capital or they can give you exclusion from the cultural capital. And some people's construction of consciousness is based on the accumulation of cultural capital, and somebody's construction of consciousness is based on exclusion of cultural capital. I think Baba Sahib Ambedkar has seen this. And therefore, if you look at the first and the foremost essay which Baba Sahib wrote, that was, the caste, genesis, mechanism, and spread. I think he uses psychological analysis that how did the Brahmins close the door first, and rest of the people found it closed for them. Now, in that sense, I think the maintenance of the purity of the blood is a psychoanalytical process. Otherwise, how we are going to account for that? And then when Baba Sahib Ambedkar talks about spread of the caste, it was not of the Manu's doing. It was law of imitation, because of which the caste has spread from one caste to the another. So I think there is this law of imitation which he uses by Gabriel Tarde. I think that is there as a psychoanalytical problem.
Thank you. There's a couple of comments here. So one is just a comment. I'm from Mauritius, and our forefathers came from India, and there's still the caste system in our country, even at the level of politics for voting. So just acknowledging that. And then there's a question by Gaurav Harsh. Oh, sorry, did you want to say anything from this? Dr.
No,
Kumar?
I think actually, that's where actually we look at the diaspora at two levels. If you read my article, I've tried to differentiate between old diaspora and new diaspora. The old diaspora started actually, it started crystallizing after 1832 when the slavery was abolished in the British colonies. Indians started fitting the bill. And I think Mauritius, Trinidad, Tobago, Malaysia, and Suriname, Sri Lanka, all those places, the caste people went in great numbers, because the ex-untouchables of the Indian society, they had nothing to cling on. The upper strata had land, they had culture, but the lower strata went in big numbers. Even if you read Fiji, Chalo Jahaji by Brij Bilal, I think he's talking about the numbers. Even Hug Tinker, Maria Carter, all are talking about big numbers of the lower strata. They went to these places where they were illiterate, single persons who went as indentured laborers. And they kept on nursing hope to come back one day, but they could never come. And that's why the caste structure, I call them, they are in their frozen memory. They are in their frozen memory. And in Mauritius, we have found the temples of Draupadi. We have also actually, there is a mythical Ganga, which is there. So I think they are still having that pristine, pure form of their culture. And that is why caste system exists in old diaspora. The new diaspora started, crystallizing only after 1947 when India got independence, and then the Indians started getting actually educated in IITs and IIMs. So when they became doctors and engineers, they started migrating. So 1950s, 60s, a different type of crystallization. The third pang of people in US, the Silicon Valley, 1990s, after the information revolution, and they had a very different type of diaspora which has gone there. The fourth shade is in UAE. There are actually the masons, the carpenters, the welders, the ironsmiths. They are there who went there. They are illiterate but semi-literate. They are all artisans, those who have gone there because of the oil boom. So there are different types of, diaspora, but I think the old diaspora is still in the frozen memory of the social structure.
I think this starts to answer Gaurav Harsh's question as well, which is what kind of research agenda can international students from India currently in the US take up to advance understandings and abolish caste inequities in university settings in the US?
Well, I am really afraid. I have a very pessimistic answer for this because I don't think that caste can be annihilated. And it is not against Baba Saheb's actually vision of annihilation of caste, but I don't think that now caste can be annihilated because caste has gone from real to virtual. One, if you go to shadi.coms, vivaha.coms, spouses are being asked on the basis of caste, subcaste, sub-subcaste. That is one. Two, caste has gone into archives. And, I was doing some work in South Africa. There I saw actually middle class people were asking and telling me that, well, I am a higher caste or not. So I think they still nurse this hope that higher and lower is there, no doubt. But I don't think that it can be annihilated. The only thing which can be done is that casteism has to be annihilated. So there's a difference between casteism and caste assertion. Usually caste assertion is considered to be ism. I define casteism as a process by which the upper strata, the powerful, tried to exclude the lower strata, the excluded from the institutions of protection, education, and governance. That is what is casteism. And that is bringing your personal practices into public. If that can be stopped, I think caste doesn't matter. You marry whatever you want, you eat whatever you want, but why should it be brought in public? That is my case. So if it can be brought, it can be stopped to be brought in public. On actually against this casteism, there is caste assertion. The caste which were excluded, they are trying to assert their rights and privileges enshrined in the Constitution. And when they assert, it is called as casteism. So this is not casteism. I take assertion as a very neutral terminology. Asserting the rights which is given to you in the Constitution. I want to take it. And I'm asking the deprived section, come, please unite. And we will have the right. So I think that will be not taking the rights of the other. Rather, you are asserting your own enshrined rights in the Constitution. That is assertion. So I think assertion is fine. Ism is bad.
Take one last question, and then I'd like to close with a question of my own as well. So, Prachi, I see your hand raised.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, sir. So actually, I want to ask two questions. My first question is this: why casteism exists now? And is it become barrier for India to become a developed country? And my second question is, we talk about equality, right? And but currently in India, everyone say this that girls they are facing inequality in terms of compared to boys. So I just want to please.
No, I think why caste system still exists. So I think if some people have mileage out of any institution, why that mileage should be given up? And I want to throw this question to the university students and teachers who are there. Why one should be teaching caste in the university? My question is this, actually. The lower strata want to read or study caste, no problem, because they want to annihilate it. They want to ridicule the existing exclusion or discrimination. They want to annihilate that. But why the upper strata want to perpetuate the curriculum on the basis of caste? Somewhere, I think that they draw a privilege. They draw a aura out of that. Again and again, you teach the same thing. Brahmins are above, Kshatriyas are above, Vaishyas are this, and lower strata is this. So you discriminate even if you teach. So I think the privilege, nobody likes to give up the privilege. People will like to maintain their privilege, not only in India, but wherever they go. And caste gives a artificial cushion. When you are in diaspora, you get a cushion from the people of your own caste and community. And when people migrate, they do not migrate as biological souls. They also take their cultural capital, and caste becomes a capital for them because they will be in isolation. So, therefore, they don't want to annihilate the caste. They want to maintain it because it gives them a cushion in India and abroad both. And of course, actually, there is patriarchy in Indian society, and that's why the women, the girl child, they are still treated the same way as they were treated, but there is assertion. There's a long way to go in that line.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're coming to a close on time, and so maybe I'll close with one question. I think I've really appreciated some of the themes that I think you've talked about have resonated a lot with the Ambedkar Du Bois Society and what our thinking is and our mission is. And one is that caste is in a global context now. It is not just in India, it is in many places. And as Ambedkar, as you were talking about Dr. Ambedkar doing comparative work, even though you have different words for things, but the kind of oppression that comes along with caste, you see in different contexts too. And there's the film Origin that came out by Isabel Wilkerson that also kind of tries to take up some of these things. So caste is a global thing that needs to be understood as such. And then I think another point that you mentioned earlier was one of Dr. Ambedkar's sort of epistemological contributions was pushing back against caste as a natural system and recognizing that it's a social system. It is something that we've produced as a society and we have to resist it as such. And so unlike the religious texts that seem to say, look, caste is fixed and this is the way it is, Dr. Ambedkar comes in. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that last point of the sort of naturalized version of caste that was in the scripture, or that the Brahmins, that would be part of the scripture. But then what Dr. Ambedkar's theory was pointing out was actually, no, it is not taken in stone. It is a social idea, and it is changing over time, and it occurs because it's a social concept. So that kind of junction, I was hoping you could end on that note.
No, if I have understood you correctly, then what actually, I try usually when look at the process of nation building. I think Ambedkar's this annihilation of caste is not only the beginning point of his production of knowledge, rather this annihilation of caste is throughout. When we look at the process of social justice, I think we look at how social justice can be perpetuated in the society after the annihilation of the caste, and then the nation building process. I think, why is not India a nation? Ambedkar is very categorically in volume, the partition of India, that is Pakistan. He is very categorical to ask this question, why India is not a nation? And Ambedkar says that a society divided in thousands of castes cannot be a nation, because nation is a process of we feeling, is a process of, say, fraternity. But castes bring animosity and jealousy. And therefore, unless and until caste is annihilated, India cannot be a nation. I think, therefore, annihilation of caste, it has a very larger agenda of nation building process. And that is mediated by constitution. Because Baba Sahib Ambedkar said that, after all, a state has to police something. Without having rights, what state will police? So I think establishment of the rights of the people, that was also part of the nation building. Now, therefore, I think annihilation of caste is just the beginning of a process, and the end was a nation building process, which was mediated by the constitutionality. Now, without constitution, because I know that the Westerners will look down upon this idea of nation, because they always think that nation is a very, very, very deterministic category, or it is a very reductionist category which want to annihilate the others. But for South Asian countries, especially if you look at, without constitution, you imagine the ex-untouchables who did not have even human rights. What to say about fundamental rights? Without establishment of the constitution and rights enshrined in that constitution, I don't think that a nation would have emerged. And Babasaheb Ambedkar argued that a nation is an idea, no problem. Philosophically, it is an idea, but sociologically, it is conglomeration of number of groups. A nation emerges unless and until the rights are given to them. So I think that annihilation of caste is not end in itself. I think it has to be evaluated in a larger agenda, and that was nation building process.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Kumar, for speaking with us today. I also want to thank Professor Gaurav Patania for connecting us with Dr. Kumar and helping this set up, and also to Northwestern University, hosting in some sense this event. So and thank you all for coming as well. And I think keep a lookout. We'll have this at some point posted on YouTube. Yeah.
So I thank the organizers for bearing me. I hope that actually this dialogue will continue, and my lecture might have given you some different vantage point to look Babasaheb Ambedkar, because I always think, who is afraid of an academic Ambedkar? They are ready to accept activist Ambedkar, but are they ready to accept an academic Ambedkar? That is the question which I'm leaving with.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Should we leave now?
Yeah, I'll end the call.
Okay. Thank you.